523. $523. And then we'll do the same opening, number 524, after this. I know the Lord will find a way for me. I know the Lord will find a way for me. If I walk in heaven's light, shun the wrong and do the right, I know the Lord will find a way for me. The Lord has said, go preach the word to all the world. The Lord has said, go preach the word to all the world. If I walk in heaven's light, shun the wrong and do the right, I know the Lord will find a way for me. Won't it be grand to hear him say, well done? Won't it be grand to hear him say, well done? If I walk in heaven's light, shun the wrong and do the right, won't it be grand to hear him say, well done? And 524. Try not to start this too high because it gets really high in the refrain. I know not why God's wondrous grace to me he hath made known, nor what unworthy Christ in love redeemed me for his own. But I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not how the Spirit moves, convincing men of sin, revealing Jesus through the Word, creating in him. But I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not what of good or ill may persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not when my Lord may come, at night or noonday fair, nor if I'll walk the vale with him, or meet him in the air. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day.
Father in heaven, be with us as we go to this time of studying your word. Be with us as we focus on the book of Mark. Help us to be able to apply what we learned tonight to our daily lives, to be able to think about the time that leading up to Jesus dying on the cross. Be with all those that are struggling both spiritually and physically, especially the Dagari family tonight as they're mourning the loss of their father. Help them as they'll lay him to rest later this week. Be with all those that are traveling to the Leaders and Leaderettes conference in Denver this weekend. Give them a safe trip there. Be with Dean and Sandy as they'll travel to Denver tomorrow. Give them a safe trip there and back. In Christ's name pray. Amen.
I think we're online. I did not ask for that last song we just sang to be sung, but I do think it was appropriate for what we're going to be studying tonight. I just want to reread that last verse we sang. We're not going to sing it, I just want to read it. But it says, as we sang, I know not when my Lord may come, at night or noonday fair, nor if I'll walk with the veil with him or meet him in the air. I do think it's that last lyric that prepares our minds for what we're going to be studying tonight from Mark chapter 13. So if you'll be opening with me to that chapter, that's where we'll spend our time. That's Mark chapter 13, as we're continuing to work our way through the Gospel of Mark. I don't think he'll mind me sharing this, but just before Bible class, Jeremiah asked me, are we in Mark again? I said, yep. Or he didn't ask me, he's like, yeah, it was, are we in Mark? And I said, yeah, we are. But I kind of seconded his question because after the retreat, my mind's still kind of recovering from all that. I had to remind myself, we are in Mark's Gospel on Wednesday nights. So anyway, just a humorous moment tonight that I had. So, Mark chapter 13. Mark is continuing to record for his readers the events and teachings of Jesus that would culminate themselves in the crucifixion, his crucifixion, as followed by the burial and resurrection. But more specifically, in this chapter, Mark has recorded the teachings of Jesus that surrounded both the destruction and his second coming that last song just touched on briefly. But it's in that context that as we come to verses 33 through 37 of this chapter, which are the closing verses of the chapter, Jesus now brings that discussion of the destruction of Jerusalem and his second coming to a close by saying in the first part of verse 33, Take heed, keep on the alert. We'll pause there. So he makes this statement, take heed, keep on the alert. What is he telling his hearers to do? In that statement. Okay, keep awake. Any other thoughts? Okay, to be on guard. Okay. Okay, keep awake, keep on guard for your soul, Guy.
I think he's just saying that keep yourself pure, keep yourself on target, keep yourself running that race.
Okay.
You never know what's going to happen, whether when he's coming or if you're just going to die.
All right, so so that would be an application of this statement, is just stay pure. Any other thoughts? Okay.
They've got to watch. Look for things that are out of place.
All right, so.
They tell a police officer and they tell a soldier that their head should be on a swivel. And as Christians, our head should be on a swivel, looking to see, because Satan he's our enemy. He's trying to trip us up.
Absolutely. So I'm just picking brains here. I wasn't fishing for a specific answer, but it is, I guess that puts it appropriately. It's that watchman language to be.
Version says be on guard, keep away, which is just exactly what Jim was saying.
What version was that doing?
English Standard Version.
English Standard. Got it.
Be on guard, keep away, which
Okay.
is just a shorter rendition of what Jim was saying.
Right.
That's
So
what a watchman would do.
exactly. So yeah, it's the idea of being aware. So Jesus saying, pay attention, be aware of what's going on around you. Now, from the context of this chapter, it's being aware of these things that Jesus has talked about throughout this chapter that were be prior to the destruction of Jerusalem and, more importantly, prior to his second coming. But it's this point, actually, before we move forward, any other questions or comments on keeping on the alert? Or okay. The thought doesn't stop there. But that's the point Jesus makes. Take heed, keep on the alert, or however your translation renders it. That he goes on to discuss in verses 30, in the remaining part of verses 33 and going through verse 37, and he makes 2 points or gives 2 reasons as to why we must be on the alert. Now, the first point Jesus makes in the second part of verse 33 and going through verse 34 is that we must be on the alert because we do not know when the second coming will arrive. And the second point Jesus makes in verses 35 and 36 is that we must be on the alert because Jesus could come at any time. Following that, in verse 37, he reemphasizes the point that his followers must be on the alert. So we'll talk about that when we get there, and after looking at these things, what we'll learn is that we must be ready for his second coming, and I'll expound upon that when we get there. But let's read verses 33 through 37, and then we'll look at the points. I'll just start at the beginning again. It says, take heed, keep on the alert, for you do not know when the appointed time will come. It is like a man away on a journey, who upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening, at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, in case he should come suddenly and find you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. We saw that phrase repeated a lot throughout those verses. That's what tells us that this is the point Jesus is dealing with, this idea of being on the alert. But why? Well, number one, because we do not know when the second coming will arrive, verses 33 and 34. So that point is introduced with Jesus saying in the second part of verse 33, he reiterates, he's still expounding upon the idea of to keep on the alert, But according to verse 33, why should we keep on the alert? When what time is? What's that? Okay, it says you don't know when the time is, but what's the time he's talking about in the context? His return, the second coming. Be aware, because you don't know when that time is coming. Now, one reason we know he's talking about specifically the second coming at this point is because he's already discussed the destruction of Jerusalem. He knows when it's coming, but earlier in the chapter he said that not even the Son knows when the second coming will occur. So his followers needed to be aware. But we know that he's giving a reason here for why we need to keep on the alert because of this word for, right there in the middle of verse 33. Now, what does the word for function as in a lot of context? Because it's a reason word. Keep on the alert, here's why. You do not know when the appointed time will come. So it's still that having your head on a swivel idea, because you don't know when the second coming is going to arrive, is the way I stated it. Anything else on verse 33? All right. So verse 34, Jesus now tells a short little story. What's the story he tells here in verse 34? Okay, like a man going on a journey, and what does this man do? Okay, he puts his servants in charge. What else does the text tell us? Gives each one of them a task. And what does the end of the verse tell us? Commands the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. So what's the picture being painted here? Okay. Okay. Now what does that have to do with verse 33? How does this illustrate verse 33? It's the being on guard idea. I mean, that's what he tells the doorkeeper, but what else does this have to do with verse 33? He went away, and he's coming back, but he inserts these ideas of each one having a task. What does that entail? What does that have to do with his second coming and us being aware? Jessica? Okay, that would be some application here, not letting our spiritual guard down. But where I'm going with this is we're waiting for the second coming. Oh, Guy has something. Go ahead, Guy.
Well, he's just trying to make sure everything is on the up and up, like as if he was there. He's just saying, okay, this needs to be done, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. I mean, he's just saying all of that to have all your ducks in a row is a way of saying it, I guess.
Okay. So what responsibility does that create for us while we're waiting for the second coming? There's work to do. We need to be doing something while we're waiting. It's not just standing by and saying, okay, just going to wait here until Jesus comes back. It's not like that. We're to be doing something. That's where these servants and things come into the picture. They're doing something, and then you have this doorkeeper who's also one of those servants. We're not going to get so bogged down in the details, but part of this is doing something while your master is away on this journey, while you wait for him to come back. Do what he's told you to do. That's part of being aware, knowing he's coming back and doing what he wants you to do while you wait. Now, just to illustrate that a little bit, I'm always going to bring up my relationship with Jenny and what goes on at our house, because it's what I know. But there are times when Jenny's waiting for one of us to do something, and we tell her, Jenny, you can do this while you wait. Get something done while you wait. Applying that here, Jesus is saying, you're waiting for me. Do something while you wait until I return. Does that make sense? Okay. All right.
Similar example, when I was a little boy, about 7, 8 years old, older brother, year and a half older than I was, and it's a whole different generation right there. Mom and Dad went to the store, and they left us at home with the job of cleaning out the patio. We didn't get cleaned up. And I still remember to this day how bad I felt when Mom and Dad came home from the store with 2 new bicycles.
Mm.
And we didn't get the job done. And we didn't know that the bicycles were going to come home, but we didn't do the job that was asked of. But no, Mom and Dad were going to come home sometime.
Yep.
And that patio needed to be cleaned off. It was a reasonable expectation, number one, because we messed it up
Yeah.
to begin with. So,
There you go. And that's what this little story is about. Doing work that was told to do while you wait, knowing the master's coming back. So that's a good story that fits this as well. Anything else on verse 34? Okay. So putting verses 33 and 34 together, the point we should see from these verses about why we must be on the alert is because we do not know when the second coming will arrive. In these verses, Jesus has once again reminded his hearers that they did not know when his second coming would come. As a result, they needed to be ready at all times. Now also, as we have seen, Jesus has illustrated this point by telling this story about a person who left, leaving his servants in charge of his house with instructions to be doing what they were told to do, and a warning that they should be ready for his return at all times. So as we await the return of Jesus, we must be both doing what he has told us to do and be ready for his return at all times, because we do not know when he will return. But that brings us into verses 35 and 36, the next point. We must be on the alert because Jesus could come at any time. Now, in verse 35, Jesus introduces that point, and he applies the story to his hearers. What does he say in verse 35? Stay awake because you don't know when the master is going to come. Does that sound familiar of the song we just sang? I know not when my Lord may come, at night or noonday fair, nor if I walk the vale with him or meet him in the air. Dad, I really appreciate you choosing that song tonight. Because that's what Jesus is saying. He's applying the story. Says, in the same way this man went away on a journey and did what he said, his hearers do not know when the master is coming. He's reestablishing the point, and he's listing possible periods of time when he could come. In the evening, he could come at night. He could come at midnight. He could come when the rooster crows, or in the morning. Now, we're not going to get bogged down in those time periods, but the point here is he could come at any time. Now, also, I think something else we should know is that this word master, it comes from the same word that could be translated as Lord. So that's just a side note. But he calls himself the master of the house. He's already used the house imagery in verse 34. So he's the master. He left his house in charge of his servants. He left instructions as to what they needed to be doing, with the warning that they needed to stay on the alert, realizing he could come at any time. Questions or comments on verse 35? All right. Now, what does he say in verse 36?
Suddenly and find you asleep.
Case comes suddenly and find you asleep. Now, what does that have to do with what he said so far?
Well, he wanted us to be awake and alert and doing what our tasks were.
Okay?
So if we're asleep, we're not doing our tasks.
If we're asleep, we're not doing our tasks. Sleeping on the job. So this is a warning. It's a warning Jesus issues where he could come and find his followers sleeping. What happens if we're sleeping when Jesus comes back? And it's not physically sleeping. Let me give you that little hint. We'll miss him. But it's not just that we'll miss his coming, because the scriptures teach every eye will see, every knee will bow. It's more specifically, going back to that song, you'll walk the veil. If you were looking at the lyrics of that song, that word veil, there's a footnote that said, the valley of death. If Jesus finds you asleep and not doing what you're supposed to do when he comes back, you're not going to go meet him in the air. You're going to be in that veil, that valley of death that song talked about, separated from him. So, yes, you'll miss him, but in the worst possible way, because you won't go on to spend eternity with him. So, verse 36 is that warning. He could come at any time. Be aware of that, because he could come suddenly and find you asleep. Now, again, that's just kind of paraphrasing what's said here. Questions or comments on verse 36? All right. So putting verses 35 and 36 together, the point we should see about why we must be on the alert is that we must be on the alert because Jesus could come at any time. Now, referring to himself as master of the house, Jesus has reminded his hearers that he could come at any time, as we've seen. But in addition to that, he also issues a warning that when he comes, he should not come finding his hearers asleep and not doing what they're supposed to be doing as they wait for his return. So what this should help us to understand is that what Jesus says in these verses is an instruction, where Jesus is instructing us to be doing what he wants us to be doing while we wait for his return, instead of being lazy and spiritually sleeping while we await his return. And so that brings us into verse 37. We come, quote unquote, full circle. And what are we told in verse 37? What does Jesus say? Is it the same thing, Don, or what?
It's not exact,
Okay. What's different about verse 37 from verse 33?
he says it to all.
Okay, Guy, go ahead.
Well, I think he's summing up everything we just went through. You know, be alert, be on guard, be ready. You've got things to do. I think he's just summing up everything that we've just gone over. And be alert.
He is summing it up, but yes, as Don read, he says, what I say to you, I say to all. What does that mean? Who's everyone, Dina? Okay. So who else is he talking to? Okay, that's true. Those that haven't listened to him yet? Are we listening to him now? Does this apply to us? That's what this I say to all is about. It's not just the 12 apostles and anybody else who's present on this occasion. It's everybody off in the future. Because as far as they're concerned, the second coming could happen the next day. But we're now 2,000 plus years removed. Same is true for us. Second coming could happen by the end of this Bible class. So that's where this, what I say to you, I say to all, comes in. Everybody who hears these words, be on the alert. Be aware. Be ready. It's an all-inclusive statement to all generations of people. So So it applies not only to Jesus' hearers there in the first century, it applies to us here in the 21st century. Questions or comments on verse 37? All right. So when we consider everything that Jesus has said in verses 33 through 37 of this chapter, the point we should be left with is the one at the beginning of verse 33. Take heed, keep on the alert. Well, why should we do that, Jesus? Number one, because we don't know when the second coming will arrive. Number two, because Jesus could come at any time. Now, since that's true, what we should learn from these verses is that we must always be ready for the second coming. The words of Jesus that Mark has recorded in these verses are words that remind us that we must be constantly ready for the second coming of Jesus. We must be ready because we do not know when he will return. We must be ready because he will come at any time. Again, as that last line of the song reminded us. But while we're part of that being ready is doing something while we wait. Living faithfully to him while we wait for his return. Making sure he does not find us spiritually asleep when he does make his return. Now again, those are just some applications from this text to us. Anything else on what we've studied tonight? All right. Dawn, will you close us tonight?